Well, once again, welcome everyone to our meeting for the month of September. My name is Adrian. I'm the chair for the Philadelphia chapter of the IGDA, and tonight we're going to be hearing from Steve Mazzeo, a board game and narrative designer, as well as an adjunct professor for Drexel University. He's got a presentation today on how randomness shapes stories and games. Before we bring Steve on, for those who don't know, let me tell you a little bit about who we are and where you can learn more. So the International Game Developers Association is a global network. We're dedicated to the advocacy for issues pertinent to game developers and the gaming industry as a whole. Here in Philadelphia, we're focused primarily on our large student and indie development community, and we host meetings such as this once every second Tuesday of the month. And sometimes we have the occasional special event, including one that's happening next week, and I'm going to talk to you about that at the end of tonight's presentation. If you want to learn more about us or keep up to date with IGDA Philly going-ons, we do have a website, which is igda.org/Philly. We're also on Discord, Facebook, and Twitter as well, all three as IGDA Philly. Those links are going to appear on the chat. We also have a code of conduct that I'd like to remind you all. We take it very seriously. You can review the code at our website, but just as a reminder, this is meant to be an all-inclusive safe space for everyone. So we ask you respect that both in the real world and digital ones, such as our Discord or virtual meetings like the one we're having tonight. All right, that's enough for me. I'm going to turn it over to Steve. Steve, go ahead, Steve.
Thanks very much, Adrian. How's everyone doing tonight? Of course, we're not live, so I can't hear you. And what we're going to talk about tonight is really how randomness feels more than anything else relative to games. So I want to start off with a story about D&D, Dungeons & Dragons, for anybody who is maybe uninitiated into that realm. And a year ago at Gen Con, which is one of the biggest board game conventions in the world, and definitely the biggest in North America, I paid an exorbitant sum of money to play a D&D experience, which is a 16-hour, 4 sessions over 4 days experience with the same table and the same DM. And part of that is what's called an epic, which means how we do as a table affects everyone around us. So everyone in the room is fighting for the same cause. And over the course of this, at the end, we're in a castle, because of course we are. We're fighting a werewolf like you do. And all of a sudden, the werewolf jumps off of a tower, and he's very far away from me, and I'm a wizard, and there's just nothing I can do about it. And I look at the DM, and I ask what the damage could be for jumping from the tower, and he tells me, and I run the numbers in my head. If it goes horribly, horribly wrong, I'll have 5 hit points left when I land, which means I'm not dead. So I jump. The whole table's nuts. It's an Adventurers League event. We're level 9. People are losing their minds. What are you doing? I said, this isn't how heroes go. Heroes don't run down the stairs real fast chasing a werewolf. If the werewolf jumps, you jump after the werewolf. The DM says, make your check. And for anyone who doesn't know what a natural 20 is, it means that it's the best thing that can ever happen in your life. The day you met your spouse is a nat 20. The day your kids are born is a nat 20. All right? The day you get your dream car is a nat 20. I throw the die into the tray. I see it land. I jump up and I yell, verify, because in an Adventurers League, we don't trust you to roll the dice. And everyone leans over. They start clapping. And it goes around the room, and the DM smiles and he goes, you can cast 2 spells this turn. And for anyone who's never gotten to put 2 lightning bolts into a werewolf, always jump from the tower. So a major reason that games work is there's random things that can happen to us. Not everything is how we plan it, and how that randomness feels shapes everything. Now, for anybody who doesn't know who this is named after, it's named after this guy, Harold Ramis, or as one of my former students said, oh, the Ghostbuster Guy. Harold Ramis in Ghostbusters proposes an insane plan at the end. And everyone looks at him and says, but we'll die. And he goes, not necessarily. There's a very slim chance we'll survive. And that's an edict to live your gaming life by. There's a good chance we'll die and a very slim chance we'll survive. And knowing what those odds of success are and how they operate, is really what gives games and stories that come from games or in games their meaning. So before we go any further, let's talk about types of randomness. Types of randomness come in a variety of flavors, all of which we're going to kind of enumerate right now. The first one, well, we'll get back to this. This is my own path through gaming, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit. But I wanted to remind everybody that I started as a lowly Magic the Gathering player in Revised, which means that I had and then sold for $20 original Dual Lands, much to my everlasting regret, only to go on to be a D&D player and a 40K player and a miniature board gamer and a board gamer and a video gamer and a few other things. So let's talk about the first type of randomness, zero. These are games with no randomness in them at all, and what happens is your fault. Not necessarily in the best of ways, but it is your fault. It's your fault. It's your fault if you win. It's your fault if you lose. It's your fault if the game is fun. It's your fault if the game isn't fun. And anyone who's ever played against someone who really doesn't know what they're doing in a game with no randomness, it can be pretty brutal. It's not always a good time to win hard, even in a tournament. And sometimes it's downright miserable. Most of us have tried these games and come out the other side going, I just don't get what I'm doing wrong. And one of the things that you're probably not doing because you're used to games with randomness in them is games without randomness have set patterns to them. There are things that you don't have to do, but you really kind of have to do in the beginning of the game. For example, in chess, there's the Ruy Lopez, which is a very famous chess opening. There's also the Queen's Gambit. Just haphazardly moving pawns forward will put you at a wild disadvantage through genuinely just your fault for not knowing. And we're not going to talk a lot about games with no randomness in them or zero in them tonight, but I want you to be aware of them and how they can be used as a sounding board. So let's talk about minimal randomness. This is Scythe. For anybody who's never played it, there's an excellent digital version. It's one of the played. And Scythe is a game where you take all your own actions. Nothing you do in Scythe is honestly that random outside of a handful of basic things. In the beginning of the game, you're dealt essentially a random object that determines what action you can take, and you immediately get to plan around it. Combat has randomized cards, number 2 through 5, which you're dealt, but you know what they are when combat is initiated or risked. Other games that do this include Hansa Teutonica, which is a game where there is almost no randomness at all outside of bonus actions that you can get over the course of the game. And games with minimal randomness have a certain appeal to gamers because they feel significantly more competitive. All right? Minimal randomness in terms of feel of competitiveness for a video game analog would be League of Legends or other MOBAs like Dota 2. You're in this sort of range where you're much more responsible for what happens, right? You don't always leave the games feeling beaten or terrible or amazed as you would with zero, but a lot of times they're kind of part of the mix, and they should have been from the beginning. These are games where, much like zero randomness, the words, crap, can I take that back? I'm really sorry, right? Come out of your mouth at an alarming rate. You just don't always know what you're doing. And frequently speaking, games with minimal randomness, because there are variable unpredictabilities in them, tend to leave you with that feeling of, I should have planned better, I should have known more, I should have thought a little harder, I could have done a little bit better over here, or maybe I didn't utilize an ability I was given, or maybe I should have tried something else, right? Again, you're on the side of this particular field where you are functionally responsible for it. All right. Even though you can occasionally say, I tripped. I should have known that. Now let's talk about this. I call these straight no chaser. Basically, this is a game where you roll dice and you take actions based upon the dice, but you don't have a lot of options ever to change the dice unless you've acquired something very particular. And games like this tend to be much more reactive. They're a very close cousin to minimal, but they're not quite there. They have a different feel to them because you're not so much enacting upon fate as you are with minimal. You are instead, And that is sort of the line that we're talking about in terms of randomness. Oh man, I needed an extra 6 to do the thing I really wanted to do. But what do I do with what I have? How do I really utilize this? And do I learn more from it or not? For anybody who's never played Alien Frontiers, this is my favorite, what I would term middleweight board games. Scythe is very, very heavy. Go and chess are very, very involved. You're going to play them to any degree of seriousness. Whereas Alien Frontiers is a game that you can go to a local gaming shop or Amazon, pick up, watch a 10-minute video on and enjoy, and honestly never feel bad about the outcome. And that's a very big line in the sand between these two concepts, right? Is that functionally the things that randomly happen to you in one should be things that you controlled. And in this, they're things that you react to. Well, I don't know, got 5 2s. That's never supposed to happen, but it does, right? Because it does. Of course it does. Random doesn't play by rules. It doesn't care what you think or feel. It does what it wants to do. It's the hand of fate. And now let's go into mitigated. Mitigated are your Dungeons and Dragons, where you know what your modifiers are. Maybe you have a reroll in your pocket. Maybe you've got an extra shot at something. There are lots of rules in these sorts of games that give you the option, right, to change the fate that you were dealt, right? D&D 5e most famously has advantage and disadvantage, which for anybody who doesn't know means you get to roll twice, not re-roll, but roll twice. And all of a sudden you're sitting here going, well, I mean, if I've got 2 shots, I might as well try the harder stuff, right? What could possibly go? I'm dead. And we've all played games like this. These are the games that tend to be ones that everybody has played. People love these sorts of games. Games that offer you commanded rerolls or selective rerolls are the most popular. Games that offer you a variety to go with it are amazing. And over the course of time, what you're going to find is that most of the time when you're like, I had a really good time, you're looking at straight no chaser or mitigated games. These are games where fate is involved enough that you can still take credit, but fate is also involved enough that you don't always have to take blame. And a big part of how we tell these stories is assigning blame to our dice. You know, our dice. You know, these aren't going to hold up too well. One's on the floor. Our dice. The things that we hate, that we can't stop buying enough of. Here's a D20, right? I have a table full of them in front of me for the presentation tonight. You know, the things that even though you've got 100 of them, I have a lamp in my living room with the dice that betray me. Because you went cold for too long. And now you're going to live in the lamp. And no one ever comes back from the lamp. I want you to know that. When the die goes to the die lives in the lamp forever. It's literally hell for dice. And then we get these. Now, Games Workshop is not the only version of this, and if there are Games Workshop fans in the room, I want you to know they get plenty of my money. I play 40K, I play Age of Sigmar, I play Lord of the Rings. Middle-earth's an amazing game. You'll probably hear him tell a story about that sooner or later. But involved in all of this is the fact that these are games where there are so many effects, so many rerolls, and so many pluses, and so many minuses, and so many changes to the dice that at some point you might look at your opponent just like, I don't know, pick whatever side you think is fair or you want it and just put it on the table. Because, I mean, why are you rolling it if you get to roll it 4 times? And, you know, you can re-roll it because you're next to this person. And if you roll a 1, you can re-roll it. And also, if you apparently get like a 2, something weird happens. So, I don't know, just pick a number and set it down. Why are we playing? What are we doing? And this is sort of the cyclical nature of randomness in games that people tend to not choose to see. Making sure I don't step on my D4. Everyone in the room should know what that means. That functionally, when we look at this, we're seeing the same sort of behavior that you see in games with zero randomness, where it's like, well, if there's so many rerolls, why didn't I have enough rerolls? If there's so many crazy broken rules, why don't I have them? And sometimes there are reasons you don't, and sometimes there aren't, and sometimes there's reasons you do. And sometimes there's reasons that those don't. Right? But for anybody who's never shot craps before, allow me to enlighten you. Your odds of rolling 2 1s are 1 in 36. Not great. Okay? So your odds of rolling bad are generally poor. We're going to talk about that a little bit later too. In addition to this, oops, one step too far, sorry. I would like to talk about cards versus dice versus other things like token pools or token reveals or other bizarre effects that we see in games. Cards feel different than dice. For example, I know I leaned out a shot, sorry. Cards, right? Everybody look at the cards. It's important that you see that I shuffled these cards later on. This is not a magic trick. I don't have that skill. But it's important that you know I shuffled them. All right? Cards feel different. If you're flipping a card over, it's a very different experience than if you're rolling dice. We anticipate things differently. We understand that cards have a finite number of options that we apparently don't assign to dice all the time in our heads. And one of the things that you're going to see in this as these stories continue over the course of the night is that there's a significant quantity of feeling that goes into randomness and not generally a significant amount of math. So let's take a moment. I have 3 master's degrees and a bachelor's degree. I forever. I took one math class. It was a correspondence college from my local town. I did it at a community college and basically transferred the credits into Drexel when I was an undergraduate, and you could do that sort of thing. Got a B+. Not my finest hour. Turns out that math isn't my thing. Not that I can't add and subtract, but functionally, math is not something that I spend a lot of time thinking about. Randomness and games are. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. So, who saw the announcement, I asked everybody if they wanted to participate, which you don't have to do, but if you would like to participate, you should have a deck of cards, 2 6-sided dice, and a pen and paper. You can do it electronically. Google Dice is very apt. You could also just pick numbers and cards at random, right? As long as you're not, cheating or whatever. Why would you cheat here, if that makes no sense? But for the sake of the argument, let's begin. The first thing we're going to do is I want you to get your cards out. Now, I'm going to show you that they're still shuffled. I don't have some magic ability or second deck of cards. Very important to this conversation. What I want you to do is get your deck of cards and get ready to cut them. Shuffle them up, be ready to go, okay? Is everybody ready? All right. First number, 6. Now, you can write down our numbers, or you can write down whether or not you beat me. That's important. And if you did beat me, how did it feel? If you lost to me, how did it feel? If you tied me, how did it feel? Those aren't great odds. 52 cards in the deck, 54 if you included jokers. So it's important to understand how beating somebody in these things feels, the randomness of it all, and how that relates to yourself. Let's try desperately to not drop my cards. Number 2, Ace of Hearts. Now, if anyone's not familiar, the cards go in number 2 to ace, high to low. And then on top of that, they go clubs, diamonds, hearts, spades, low to high. Basically, alphabetical order with S being the highest. All right? Take a moment and write those down. We're going to talk about this stuff as we go through this a little bit later on. Now I'm going to give the cards another little cut. Not bad. King of Hearts. King of Spades. I can see my own card. Trust me. Important. Write it down. Did you win? Did you lose? How does it feel? Does it matter? It doesn't know. Do you not know if it matters? Because the stakes have not been defined yet, and that's an important concept. Generally speaking, randomness, when we don't have cards defined or stakes defined for us, feels like more than playing War when you're a kid. That's the game where you say 1, 2, 3, flip, and you flip the deck. You, generally speaking, just cut the deck in half and go from there. You're not terribly worried about the outcome. So what was at stake? How competitive a person are you? Does the fact that you might have lost 2 of 3 or 3 out of 3 if you drew really bad the first time, does it bother you? Does it not bother you? Are you suspicious that I got an ace and a king? Or does it honestly feel like, well, it's a fair shot, right? Now, before we go any further, I want to tell you a story about my past relative to Magic the Gathering. Yep, Magic the Gathering. When Alliances came out, I'll let that sink in for anybody who really knows Magic. Yes, I am that old. I played when Alliances stopped playing when Alliances came out. When Alliances came out, I was playing my friends, and I was a teenager, and I'd been playing for a few years, and I just couldn't do it anymore. And I really thought about it because Magic the Gathering had been my home. For anybody who has never put a word to it, in my opinion, gamers, we have homes. We have games that we play that are basically as comfortable for us as our room or our living room. They're a space that we occupy that we do so much with and live in so very, very much that it deeply matters to us that the game continues, okay? You'll hear me complain a lot about games if you take my classes or talk to me. Lots of gamers do, but the truth is, for as many times that I've complained about 40K, I have never once wanted to see it go away. For as many times I've complained about the price of a Magic card, I've never wanted to see Magic go away, not really. Why? Well, they were my home for a long time. I remember playing Magic the Gathering when I was a kid and giving up because 1 in 15 felt really bad. 1 in 15 felt awful. And it's 1 in 15 because your deck is 60 cards and you have 4 of each card that you need in it. And very frequently, I would find myself in a position where, man, I need to draw that card or I'm going to lose this game. I'm going to lose this game again, or I'm going to bounce out of this tournament, or I'm going to be eliminated from this game, or gosh, it's just embarrassing. I haven't won all day, right? And sitting there on turn 5, because I wasn't very good at Magic the Gathering, I'm going, 1 in 15. And for anybody who's done the math in their head at the moment, 1 in 15 is wildly inaccurate. It's much, much closer to like 1 in 12 to 1 in 10 at that point. Still not great, but very, very significant difference. And the point of the story is not Mazzeo can't do math, because you should have gotten that from the last story about my education. The point of the story is that I didn't really understand how the randomness of the game I was playing worked, despite having played it for years. I didn't comprehend, and granted, yeah, I was a teenager, but I didn't understand that every time I drew a card from the deck, it changed that number and increased the likelihood of it. And I didn't understand how all of those elements in the game that made that randomness really do come into effect. To me, it felt exactly like, why don't you just decide what card to draw? I don't understand what the challenge is. And a huge part of Magic the Gathering is exactly that challenge, right? Is exactly that. Did you build a deck, Jake? Did you build a deck that has enough outs in it that on turn 4, when it's roughly 13 to 1 odds of drawing cards you need, that you put 6 cards in, 4 of the best ones and 2 of the second best ones, to give yourself a much better chance of pulling that card because you usually need it, right? And that is one of the major mitigating factors of a game that once the deck is shuffled and stacked and cut, it is what it is. All right? And that's a very important thing to understand. And one of the things that I want to talk about after that is how I responded. And I responded by giving up cards because cards are stupid and getting these 6-sided dice. That's when I started playing Warhammer 40K. Now, I'm going to assume that most of you have not been through the annals of Warhammer 40K the way I have. So let me enlighten you. It's a very expensive game. It was less expensive in 03 when I played it, but it still cost me $150 to buy into, and that was a minimum buy-in. Under current prices, these are what single models can cost. Not all of them, but a great deal of them. Now, granted, $170 one is close to 18 inches tall in all of its glory and looks amazing. It's also so to you in gray plastic. You have to build it and paint it yourself, and I'm partially colorblind, so painting's not in my wheelhouse at all. The one on the other side is a Hive Tyrant, but they're several because they love those Tyranids, and it's only $60. But here's the thing. It was an expensive Switch. Yes, Magic is a game where single cards can go for $40,000 or $50,000. You can eBay that later. It's a Black Lotus for anyone who doesn't know. But there's an inconsistency to it because you don't always have to have them. And when I switched largely out of the desire to remove myself from the randomness of a deck of cards and into the randomness of dice, because at that point I was a third-year Drexel on a 5-year program and knew just enough about math to be able to look up how a D6 is spread out, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. We're going to come back to that slide. And at that particular moment, I had this very interesting phenomenon. Now, when you roll a 6-sided die, there's obviously 1 to 6 numbers. And for anyone who's ever played a war game that uses D6s, there's a very big divide between a 2-up or a 3-up, meaning if I roll a 2 or higher or a 3 or higher, I'm going to succeed, versus a 4-up, 5-up, or 6-up. There are games that are RPGs like Shadowrun that live and die on a 5-up. You might roll 11 dice, but only 5s and 6 count. You need a certain number of successes to succeed. Completely different than D&D. It is a straight no chaser scenario. I have a lot of dice, I throw them and see what fate gives to me. Versus that I have 1 die, but I have a lot I can do with it. And that feels exponentially weird. Inevitably, most people will tell you that the dice are hot when they don't need them and cold when they do. And yeah, 100% accurate. Your dice are, generally speaking, on fire when I need 2 successes and I'm rolling 11 dice. But when I need 5 because I'm against a boss, nothing, 0. Just punch me, I guess. I don't know. Can't help you. Now, I do want to talk real quick about the concept of digital dice, in particular relative to Roll20. If anyone's never, or no, start that over. If you've never used Roll20, Roll20 is a website that allows you to play RPGs online, and it has a built-in dice roller. Its dice roller is time-seeded, and one of the things you may know is that they're not always dice. Most people do realize that over time playing with them, but even a D6, as simple as it is, has a weight to it. It's inside, you can't necessarily see it. You can, however, if you wish to know, do a saltwater test that you can Google, because I'm not going to share that, or if you're really mad, you can start microwaving them and hope that it changes the balance of the die inside without warping it. Roll20 uses a time seed, which means the dice are inherently streaky, and it's very, very frustrating for players that are used to dice going hot and cold to see them always go streaky. Complicated when most people I know tend to roll dice in real life, even while they're playing online, and just take each other at their word. Because let's face it, if you're cheating at Dungeons and Dragons, I'm now more worried about you than I am the game, because it's supposed to be fun and quirky and interesting, not an exercise in winning. Because we all win in D&D if we played it right. All right, so when I switched, because it was more comprehensible to my 20-something self, I realized that what I really wanted was to not have randomness in my life and play games that had a lot of randomness in them. So I picked a group that had a lot of 3-ups in it, and then picked the models that had 2-ups in it, because it felt great to win dice all the time. Except, of course, when you lose 3 times in a row and then you're not sure what happened and you're apologizing to D&D life, and you should be concerned. So at this juncture, if you have 2d6 or you'd like to go to Google Dice, which are the best brand of digital dice in my opinion, now is the time to roll 2d6. We're doing 2d6 because we're going to talk about spread on 2d6 in a little while. Just go ahead and give them a roll. And my first number is a 9. I'm pretty happy with that. 9's not a bad roll. Write down whether you won or lost, or write down the numbers if you so choose. I will not remember the numbers, so you're on your own for that particular juncture of things. But let's give him a second roll. And I have a 7. 7 is average on 2d6. 7 is nothing special at all. It is straight average. And at least, I'll regret that tomorrow night when I'm playing Dungeons and Dragons and need damage, but here we go. 11. 11 is statistically improbable, but still happens from time to time. All right, so with those written down, and they will matter later at the end if you're paying attention, let's talk about some other things in gaming. This is Star Wars Armada. Star Wars Armada is my favorite game of all time. I've ranked well in national level tournaments in Armada. An entire army in Armada costs about $120. I have played a lot of games of Armada in my life. At one point, I had earned the nickname Ackbeard, after Admiral Akbar and my beard, which I trimmed for tonight after 6 months of quarantine. And I'm going to tell you a story about the time I messed up. See, weird things happen in naval combat. If you're used to playing infantry games or war games where you can do whatever you want whenever you want on a grid, all of a sudden ships have momentum, and going fast or slow has consequences to momentum. And you're, generally speaking, either the one setting or the one in a trap. And I thought I set a brilliant trap. I mean, a brilliant trap. Ugh. I had my light cruisers in position. We're going to take a Star Destroyer down. There's nothing this guy can do. Hey, about that torpedo boat over there. I forgot on the other side of my board that there's a Gladiator class Star Destroyer, which is a little tiny Star Destroyer with a lot of torpedoes on it. Torpedoes are bad in naval games if you're on the receiving end of them. And I'm staring at this going, well, I'm done. I've lost. It's my fault. My dice didn't matter, and it's nothing I can do. I should have seen that coming. I'm an experienced player. I placed third at Nationals the year before. And all right, let this guy kill my ships and shake my hand and lose like a gentleman. That's all that's left to do. And then the hand of God appeared, and he rolled blanks. But he had a reroll. So, what are you going to do? And then he rolled blanks again. Oh, I am the champion. I am chosen. Obviously. It's not a statistical aberration. That is straight on fate saying, no, Admiral, this is your battlefield. This man was impertinent. Allow me to punish him on your behalf. And I went on to crush him. And it was satisfying, but he was completely demoralized because statistically he should have killed at least one of my cruisers, and he got 0. That's like if I had jumped from the tower and died from a heart attack on the way down and been brought back to life with a spell of resurrection, only to fall on my head and die a second time. Oh, it was brutal. Just brutal. I took the win. I want to be very clear about that. I took the win. Because, it was a tournament and I won, so I should take the win. But it was important to see that happen, that sometimes the great stories don't come from your dice going hot, but somebody else's dice going tragically cold. Just, oh, poor Mike. That's his actual name. Poor Mike. He's a friend. He won't care. Now we're going to talk about 2 board games that most of you will be familiar with. Monopoly and Catan. And we're going to not talk about the development issues around them because I'm already cruising at 35 minutes and we're going to have some crunch to do. Monopoly and Catan are 2 games that share exactly one major thing in common. 2 6-sided dice. That's what you get to work with. 2 6-sided dice. Now at this juncture, and I'll plug this again at the end, this topic was originally introduced to me in a podcast called the Pondcast from the Evil Quacks, run by a friend of mine, Amanda. And this topic is discussed in some particular length in that podcast, including a dissertation on some of the rules that we're not going to really get to here today, but I want to encourage you to look that up. It's interesting. The important thing about Catan, and have your pen ready for this, is that very, very often, one is viewed as extraordinarily random and one is not. It's viewed as a contest of true skill, and one is viewed as whoever rolls the best wins, right? And I want you to write down which one you think it is right now. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But what I'm going to say is most of the time people feel Monopoly is very, very random and Catan is not. Catan is much more skill-driven. And we're going to have a little chat about dice tonight and how that's a load of crap. All right? So the first thing we're going to talk about here is 6-sided dice. And this is statistical breakdown. No, I didn't do the statistical breakdown. I went on the internet and found it. The site is below. I encourage you to research it on your own, but the numbers are correct, majoritively speaking. And if you look, the important thing here is a 7. Hold on a second. I'll set these dice. this number here. Oh, wait, is it that number there? Or is it this version here? Oh, wait, maybe it isn't that version at all. Maybe it's this version of it here. 7 can be made with any two numbers on the dice, right? You have to have a 4 to go with that 3, but you're never out of the running. Whereas if you need it's a 4 and you roll a 5 on one of those dice, well, you're done. Thanks for trying. And it's an important fact to understand that these dice do have a statistical breakdown and that the games do respond to these statistical breakdowns in advance. Most notably, it allows a robber put it on a square and steal a card at random from somebody else. All right. And what that means is that in theory, from the perspective of Catan, 16.7% of the time, but let's call it 17 because let's not nitpick on this. You're very, very likely going to get something. And if you're a smart player and you play something on a 6 and something on an 8, that means 17 plus 28. Not so bad, right? 17 plus 28 is 45. I think, pretty sure. Not auditioning for math here. So 45% chance I get something on any given roll. That's a good way to look at it. That's a smart way to look at it. 45% chance, pretty good odds. I'd take those odds. Why not 45%? Oh, yeah, except there's definitely going to be times where that 55% bites you really hard, and you'll sit there for 5 dice rolls getting nothing, watching the hourglass tinkle out as your buddies accumulate innumerable wealth and accomplish their goals while you are dead in the water. Conversely, monopoly with the same median is always chipping away at $200. And this is an important thing to understand, is that the concept of streaky dice in Catan, right, that hot and cold moment, is very, very different than a swing, all right? Swing means you roll big, you win big, you roll bad, you lose bad. Monopoly here offers you, if the black arrows are 7s, so starting at go, you land on Chance, Virginia, Kentucky, Waterworks, Short Line, and then Community Chess. Not great properties for those. I personally favor the light blues and the greens, the North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Pacific variety. But you're always chipping away at a little bit more money, meaning that the little bit of bleeding that you do over the course of the game is essentially automatically regenerated, unless, of course, you manage to go to jail. Adding to that is the part where, statistically speaking, every 6 turns, you should roll a set of doubles and give yourself an extra roll. You can go streaky and move most of the board in a turn if you can get 2 doubles and then not doubles. You can go cold and basically spend forever on one row. But you're always moving a little bit forward, especially people that play with a house rule of free parking, which I don't. That's a whole thing. It's in the podcast. Go listen to that if that worries you. Catan, on the other hand, is a contest game. You're not perpetually chipping away at numbers. What you are doing is basically hoping every time somebody picks up the dice that you're going to get something you can use, right? So if you look at blue, which is the easiest color for me to see, you need a 2, a 3, a 4, a 5, or a 6. Not bad. That's a lot. 7's already in your favor. So literally over half the dice rolls should go your way. There is, so a 9 apparently in there. All right. That's a good statistical spread. But here's the thing. It's a very particular gamble. You see, in that particular spread, you're not going to get a lot at any given time. You're going to get a little bit, right? You're never going to hit there and go, oh, I missed the 11s as well. Whatever. It's very good odds. Oh, they rolled a 6. I'm set for life, right? I need to roll a 6. If I roll a 6, I can do a lot at this juncture of the game. Nope. If I roll a 6, I'm going to get 2 resources. If they roll an 11, I'm going to get 2 resources. If they roll a 4, I'm going to get 2 resources. I picked all the 2s. If they roll a 3, I'm going to get 1 resource. Whereas when you look at the board, well, okay, average is 7, but if I'm sitting on chance and I land on States Avenue, that's a pretty good second turn. If I land on Pennsylvania Railroad, that's a pretty good second turn. If I land on St. James Place, that's a pretty good second turn. Man, that's a pretty good spread of the dice, and it goes pretty well up the line if what you want to do is acquire property. You do. It's the whole point of the game. Functionally, right, a spread versus a target. Functionally, a hot and cold versus a consistency effect. The thing is, most people, if you talk to them about Monopoly, will never mention the pass and go rule. It's not something most people think about. It's not an idea in their head that like, oh, well, I like Monopoly because feast or famine, it doesn't matter. I'm going to get $200 eventually, and $200 will buy me a pretty good amount of stuff on this board. They're really, really focused on the thrill of that single die roll. Now, this comes back to, if you've never shot craps, which don't waste money on craps. If you're going to play it for free or spend as little money on it as possible. Throwing the dice in craps is amazing. Having been a $5 a throw craps player for one night at a buddy's bachelor party, it was a very good time. And not simply because I won $20, which I immediately spent on liquor, but because I very, very much got into that, like, you blow on the dice, you roll them, everyone has their style, you toss them down the lane, and what happened? What happened? And it's amazing what can happen in that moment. And I completely empathize with that feeling in Catan, but I have played enough games of Catan to bloody hate it. Oh, sitting here forever, waiting for a 6 or a 9 or whatever it is that I need to give me a little bit of gas to get over the line versus all the times in Monopoly where I've really needed, you know, man, I'd really like to roll an 8 to land on Boardwalk, but I would happily take a 9 or above, get my money and move on, especially if I can get Baltic or Mediterranean in the deal. And that sort of mitigation versus straight no chaser is kind of the essence of these two games and is a huge divide among players. Most of us quietly right now are having this conversation with ourselves about I'm this sort of player. And maybe you are, maybe you aren't. Maybe you are on certain days and not others, right? No one is ever always one thing. That'd be weird. And the effects of those randomness really do influence us. So here is the essentially bell curve in a bar graph form of what this looks and feels like. And this is why experienced Catan players will say it is skill-based. No offense, is it really that skill-based to like put your stuff on a 6? Is that like a thing that you're like renowned for? Maybe you're an 8 person. I don't know. Not judging. No judgments here. Whereas the number of times I've won with orange in Monopoly is a lot. A lot. Now, I'm not saying the games don't have their flaws mutually, okay? I'm picking a particular side because I have to make the lecture effective, but also I'm a Monopoly person at heart. But you have to realize that there's a lot of swings in Monopoly because of the story of its development, which you can look up on your own, that really do make it feel rough, like legitimately rough, right? Most games of Monopoly end with, and I roll the dice, and I'm dead. I'm dead. That's a hotel I can't afford. I'm dead. Or worse, I'm not dead, but like I'm really close to dead. So now I have to sit here with like my empire ramshackle ruin while a bunch of other people play a game that I can't leave because it completely corrupts the game to do so. It's rough. It's rough. It's rough very much like when your team charges in and the Rhine drops its shield from Overwatch, and all of a sudden your McCree is on the floor because their Widow is mildly better than yours. Not a lot better, just better enough, and your Rhine is incompetent. Highly, highly incompetent. Like holding down that right mouse button is just such a challenge. As a former Rhine main, I can attest to it is very difficult. My fingers, you know, I switch off between these two fingers on that right mouse button, and it's rough. It's rough. It's a legitimate trial for a human being to endure. And I feel like it's an underappreciated art form. But in this vein, let's talk about the translation of this phenomenon. Body shots, right? Two kinds of snipers in the world, body shots and headshot snipers. Headshots want one die roll to win them all, and body shot snipers want consistent damage over time. And Functionally, they're both completely valid forms of the game, despite requiring slight innumerable differences. And those differences are what most people would say makes the difference between a good one and a bad one. But that's not true. That's not true. What it means is that if you've got a Widow or a Hanzo that likes to put arrows or bullets into the center mass of other players for a lot of damage, you have to play accordingly. You owe it to them as your teammate to compensate and not yell. That's not how Overwatch works. If no one's ever played it, Overwatch is a first-person shooter by Blizzard Entertainment from 2016. If you've ever sat in a room with me for 15 minutes, you've probably heard an Overwatch story. If you've taken the Blizzard class with me, you have heard a lot of Overwatch stories, like probably enough that you don't want to hear this next part, but you're gonna. All right, body shots versus headshots are an interesting conundrum because you see there's this guy named Bastion. And I'm a Bastion main. Hi, nice to meet you. Yes, you may curse at me all you like now. And Bastion is a robot that turns into a turret in Overwatch. It's a literal stationary minigun that hops around as a robot and does various things and then jumps back into a turret form and murders people left and right. I'm an ambush guy. Naval combat guy. Really enjoy that moment where you just didn't look far enough to your right. And now your hopes and dreams are on the floor with the rest of your body. Oh, GG. I'm going to move slightly to my left so that when you turn around next time, you'll miss me again. Because let's face it, Bronze Leaguer, that's what's going to happen to you, isn't it? I'm eternally bronze too. Don't take that as elitism. Bastion, in the long, long ago of 2016, which feels a lot longer. By the way, it's September of 2020, not March, just putting that out there. Used to be able to get headshots. A Bastion that can get a headshot is absurd. Because you see, when a Widow or a Hanzo fires their single shot down the range, or McCree fires a single shot down the range, that's that dice throw, right? That's that craps moment of hot and cold. Do I land the shot? Does it matter? How do I feel about this? Oh gosh, they're down. Oh gosh, they're down. Oh gosh, we're down. Nope, it's over. It's a setup for point 2. I'm sorry. That's my fault. Right? But when you had a Bastion that could get a headshot, basically is Bastion had a long enough hallway, Bastion would get a headshot. Because when you roll craps with 300 dice, it almost doesn't matter that you're rolling dice. Why don't I just pick the guy that dies, and you can play without that player for the next minute or so. And it's a very important concept in that tactics and traps and maneuvering inside of these games influences how that randomness functions and is perceived. Side deals influence how that randomness is perceived. Consequences to players' actions relative to the results of the randomness all come together to shape these narratives that we live and die on. And that is sort of what we're getting towards, but not just yet. Right now, I'd like to talk about the time that I made top 8 at a national tournament for Armada. And it was great. Day 1 was me, what we uncouthly call clubbing a baby seal. Baby seal is a player that has no earthly business being at a national tournament, but came because they were free that weekend. And they're the player that you spend a literal hour before the tournament praying you get 3 of in a row. And I did. I got 5 in a row. That's like rolling 12 5 times. It's amazing. It's the 5 20s in a row. Just, I set up a trap, and the toddlers flew their ships into it, and my ships destroyed their ships. My Star Destroyers ruined the rebellion that day. Nothing left. And I went to bed, and I felt great. I mean, not just great, but no, I really am this good. I am validated in my decisions. And then day 2 happened, and I lost every game day 2, never came close, and I was apparently the toddler that day. I was the baby seal. And what happened was, very simply, the dice just weren't there that time. I needed averages, and I never got them when it counted. I needed a little bit of luck here and there, and apparently I spent all of it on day 1. And we've all been there. We've all had great traps in the first point of Overwatch, only to lose the game amazingly through all of overtime because we can't set up on point 2 properly for some reason all of a sudden. Or we've made a significant amount of wins in a Magic GT in Modern, and then we get to top table and we die. It's an extremely rough lesson in how your skill can be negated or validated by streaky dice or consistency, and how the type of games you play preference one type of randomness over the other matter greatly. It's worth noting at this point that Armada uses dice to determine attack damage, but non-random effects to mitigate that damage on the part of the defender. The randomness on the part of the defender is when shots do go through, they have to draw damage from a deck of randomized effects. And those effects can be fairly devastating. Almost so devastating, in fact, that people frequently kind of blow their cool on them if they get the wrong one. It's an interesting layered effect to a very, very specific game. All right. Now that we're talking about Overwatch, here's a shot of Ryan. That's the last time I saw Ryan alive in 2016. Every time, charging at me through an entire field of bullets. All right. And I want you to remember the Ryan charge, because in a minute we're going to talk about cheating and how cheating feels, as well as, and this is an unrelated topic for those of you who know me, the dice and cards we did earlier. Now, let's talk about this. This is Blood Bowl 2. Blood Bowl is a game based in the fantasy realm where you play football, but it's rugby, basically. It's American football, but it's kind of more or less just rugby. And you get to play on one side in the blue are actually high elves, and on the other side in red are the orcs, but they also have rat people and lizard people and all manner of fantasy creatures, right up to and including ents. There are walking trees, there are trolls. It's a pretty fun little game, and there's a tabletop version and a video game version. They both run on D6s. Quite literally, they both run on D6s. When you do certain actions in the game, you have to make a check, just like you would in D&D or a lot of other games, or like a computer would do for you in a Reinhardt charge to determine if you hit somebody or not. We'll talk about that in a minute. And the video game at the bottom of the screen, when you make a check, actually shows you the die that it rolled. It gives you the actual number. And it even looks like a little die. They did a nice graphic jobs with it. It looks very nice. But fundamentally, what you're dealing with is a game where they're trying to be so true to the tabletop randomness that they're showing you the dice as evidence that they're not cheating. And I've never once met a player who played a tabletop game with D6s and the video game version of Blood Bowl and thought that that actually worked. It doesn't work at all. Actually, what happens is the video game feels alarmingly streaky, almost streaky enough that you might say it rolled a whole lot of numbers in advance somehow, or had an algorithm that determined your success rate, and that it's generally crap what happens through parts of the game, where you'll roll 3 or 4 6s and 5s in a row and then 4 1s for no reason. And this is where that sort of sentiment comes in, where if you're aware of it as a player, and you're particularly, I mean Gryffindor as I am, well, if it seems like I'm rolling 6s lately, why don't we push our luck? Nope, rolling 1s. We're not going to do anything and wait for the time to wipe the die out so that we can go on to the next thing, because obviously this is what has happened here. Now, conversely to this idea, very similarly, is Divinity Original Sin 2, which is a great game that emulates D&D by Larian. And very, very interestingly relative to this, Baldur's Gate 3, which I actually got to see the premiere demo of at PAX East this year, where we presented a panel, me and a few other people. And I don't even know how to explain this. Basically what happened was the dev got up there, started to play Baldur's Gate 3, and then the dice went ice cold. And I mean ice cold. I mean, I watched the dev die by walking on a screen full of people at PAX East. Just an auditorium of 1,000 or 1,200 people, all of us with our phones out, taking pictures and bragging about this. For those of you that are old enough, or the people that have 8 series, they were an amazing set of games back in the day, and we're sitting here and I'm like, this would be great. I love this game. I'm like, yep, no, I remember that. I remember my dice going ice cold and me not being able to do anything at all. And the difference is that when your dice go cold in real life, it doesn't feel like you're being cheated, because they're dice. They do that to you. You might hate them. They might live in the lamp forever after this, but After all, they are dice, and it is fate that you are tempting, so you take your chances when you pay your money. Fundamentally, however, in a video game, it's a very different experience because you really don't want your game to appear like the dice don't work in front of a room full of people at PAX East. That's not a good way to go about this. Now, let's have a real moment, all of us. And I want to show you the dice that I rolled earlier. I'm just going to show you the dice that I rolled earlier. I'm going to show you. Land on my coffee. The absolute fist full of dice that I rolled earlier that were absolutely set up. All three of them were. All three of them were. And yeah, I cheated. And I cut one of the cards for real and stacked the deck the other 2 times off screen. Really difficult to do. And why and how does it feel? And this is an important thing. See, cheating feels terrible when it matters. Cheating when it doesn't matter is a joke, right? There's no reason for me to stack my dice. It doesn't matter if I win or lose. What difference does it make? Except for the part where you can sometimes feel cheated. And the way you feel cheated matters greatly. And most of the time in gaming, it isn't from that random effect that we feel cheated. It is usually from, man, our ELO or LP or our SR. Yeah, like I'm silver. I've been silver and gold for a year, and now I'm stuck in bronze hell. And it's not my fault. It's not me, right? I mean, it's probably not you. But I just can't get that SR to work right. Doesn't fall in my favor. And for me personally, this happened in Overwatch in between seasons 1 and 2. When Overwatch came out, I was playing a lot of Overwatch. I didn't have a lot going on. I got to play a ton of Overwatch. And in the ton of Overwatch I played in season 1, I pulled a rank 50 when ranks used to be out of 100. Way, way, way back in the day for anybody who doesn't know. That was a pretty good rank. That was middle gold, at least, out of placement. And it never quite worked ever again because their system kept changing and I was getting frustrated with it, and it felt like I was being constantly cheated by a faceless algorithm that did random things, right? Whereas if you were cheated in real life, if you caught somebody stacking a deck in Magic the Gathering, you'd smack the deck off the table and start screaming for the judge. Of course you would. The stakes are high. It matters. Your ELO matters. Your SR matters. Your LP matters, right? A Yasuo that's not quite as good as your opponent feels like you're being cheated because maybe they're deranking. Or, oh man, I got stuck with a squad that's not trying to win and I'm being cheated in that way. Or, oh man, I'm being cheated in this way or that way. And here's the thing that's very, very odd about cheating, right? Most people spend all their time wondering how they got cheated. How did I get cheated? How did they do that to me? Okay, wait, hold on a second. Being cheated makes me feel this way. Being honestly cheated makes me feel this other way. Being cheated by a machine makes me feel a specific way. And inside all of those things, inside all of those emotions and how did they do it and what happened is the entire essence of our conversation tonight, right? Because on a very fundamental level, cheating violates natural order. It violates not simply the rules of the game or the agreed upon rules between us and the contract between us as we play a game, but they actually violate the core construct of a narrative that we're living. And it's a very important thing to understand in distinction that when you're cheated and it doesn't matter, it's like, I went to this lecture and this guy cheated at the dice for some reason. And versus I went to top table and I was playing a card game and I watched the guy double lift. That's where you take 2 cards off the top of the deck. One, and use the bottom card because you stacked the deck in such a way that that would help you. And I saw him do it, but I didn't catch it fast enough and I couldn't get to the judge. And I think I would have had him if he hadn't done that, right? These are very, very different emotions. And in that story is I did really well, but I just got cheated. Versus I did really, really well, and my dice went cold on day 2, and I lost screaming as my starships burned in outer space, and I watched my Star Destroyers crash into moons. And the reason behind this is the concept of fate intervening goes way back in human storytelling. It's, I mean, it's not technically a part of Campbell, but it's right up there in terms of longevity and history. And I'm going to draw from a very old history lecture I had so if I'm a little wrong, please forgive me. It was 10th grade and I am 38, so it's been a bit. In ancient Sparta, there would be a contest when you would graduate, and basically you would go into an arena and they would flog you. And your goal was to take the most profound beating you could take. And to the point where they would even rub salt into the wounds and cause, insane amounts of pain to prove how tough you were. And if you died too fast, if you went down to, not died, literally, they didn't beat you to death, but if you passed out if you tapped out too early, you're essentially an outcast because you weren't tough enough. But let's say you went down on flog 4, and right next to you is a person who passed out. Well, that person's fine. That person brought a promotion, because you see, if you passed out during this contest, that was the gods intervening on your behalf. That was divine intervention actually coming through on in your favor to say, nope, not this one, sorry. Go ahead and beat the other children, but not this one. And cheating absolutely ruins that. The deus ex machinas that occur in games are critically important, and games and narratives are critically important because, and sometimes they do bother us, but lots of times you'll find yourself saying, oh, it was a deus ex machina, but who cares? Why? Well, because on a certain level, we've all had that moment. We've all had a moment where we're stopped at a traffic light and, oh, the light turned green, but I don't know, I just didn't go right away and there was an accident right in front of me. Or I was standing right next to the person and they got hit. And a minute later or a minute earlier, I would be dead right now. If I had been a little to my left or a little to my right when that car went out of control, it would have hit me instead of the telephone pole, and I'd be a vapor. Those things happen in our real lives. I mean, hopefully not to us, but they do happen in real life. And because they happen in real life, there's a visceral reaction that we share on a human level that transcends all people, into the effect that those stories come from all different cultures. These ideas come from all different places. And fundamentally, those risks that we take yield the meaning of these games. And that is the major, major thing that I want you to take away from this, is that fundamentally, games are ludological narratives. Yes, they have traditional narratives in them. Yes, the traditional very important. Yes, I love talking about those. But a story that we have played, and by the way, I've never LARPed. I want to be upfront with that. Don't ask me any LARPing questions, can't help you. A story that we have played feels very, very different than a story that we have observed, because we were there. Most people don't play D&D just to hear the narrative. I mean, that's great, and I love it. I'm currently running Strahd, and I deeply enjoy it as the DM, but fundamentally, it's a question of how did this work? How did this happen? And in that hand of fate, you'll also find your ELO, your LP, and your SR, the tournament bracket at your local gaming store or the national conference or whatever it is that you're playing. The moment where fate hands you a win, you're paired against somebody who's hopelessly outclassed by your ability, and you're stunned into or you're facing in round 1 the guy that would go on to win Worlds, like I did at Star Wars Legion, which is a ground troop Star Wars game, in 2018. And your entire, everything died. Everything died. But I got killed by a guy that went on to win Worlds. Not my fault. I'm not that good. It's okay to be not that good. So where does all of this come together? And all of this comes together in that most stories that we tell and most things that we do are fundamentally a combination of a traditional narrative and a ludological narrative. And when you start looking at it from that perspective, you end up in this very, very interesting realm of how did fate play a role? How did I, as a player, maneuver myself in position to win a dice roll or a coin toss or a card flip. RNG, how did that happen? Anybody who's ever played Overwatch seriously has seen Ryan charge through somebody, just right through them, just definitely went through a hitbox there. Or, man, they went through a hitbox and then they went through a rock because the rock doesn't actually have anything in it. It's just fake. And you see those things happen in video games all the time. The little glitches, the lags, the little quirks of the game and the connections between us that actually produce the stories we tell. Almost no one tells a story about a time where they masterfully executed a gambit in chess with any validation to it unless they're playing against another person of amazing skill. Why? Well, there's nothing to tell. I did all of my steps in order and I won, versus I put myself in position in a tournament and then the dice delivered me home. And there's an important thing here when Einstein says that God doesn't play with dice, that in games, that's actually not true. In simulations of real life, that's just not true. And therefore, it is fate, not chance, that delivers you, right? Nobody ever says, I just plain got lucky, except under very specific circumstances. It is, I masterfully positioned myself to win, and then fate said, okay. As if the ability to win these games with chances built into them and randomness built into them is a function of pleasing the gods, the Deus Ex Machina, the fate, divine intervention, not because you're just lucky, but because you were good enough to be ordained to be lucky. And these are the stories that you will tell the rest of your life as a gamer. Take it from me. Those are the times where you did draw that 1 in 15 card in your middle school tournament and came in 3rd place and proved to all your friends that you weren't as bad as they thought you were. Yeah, soak that in. I played for a pack of Fallen Empires. Google that later. It's a terrible set. When it comes to the actual narratives of the game, randomness plays a different role. Beyond the ludological narrative, and a little too soon on that, beyond the ludological narrative, storytellers make an incorrect assumption that choosing or checking boxes into an ending makes a narrative compelling, or a random ending can't be compelling when the reverse is actually true. Very often that players that know there's multiple endings to a video game will checkbox their way into the multiple endings without really feeling very much and then just pick their favorite. Okay, headcanon's important and I recognize that. Fandom is a thing. But on the whole, wouldn't it be better in BioShock if instead of the little sister conundrum of all, some, or none, producing 1 of 3 different endings, if however many actions I took in this vein produced a more likely but not guaranteed outcome? Wouldn't that feel more rewarding? Yeah, it could be frustrating, but there's also a million Let's Plays on YouTube. You really need to see the ending, right? And you need to consider, when you think about games that you play and games that you make, how you want that ending to feel really, really relative to that particular aspect of things. See, whether or not an ending is compelling draws on catharsis, which is poetics from Aristotle, which you should read if you're ever going to do anything creative in your life, ever. And fundamentally, there's nothing more egregious a sin than for a storyteller, whether you're telling a traditional narrative or a gameplay narrative or anything in between, and a combination of, and I could go on the synergies of this until you all fell asleep tonight and it was 5 a.m. and I just took a shower and went back to work instead. But robbing your audience of catharsis is a crime against nature. It's the same thing as cheating, because functionally, you've earned it. Even if fate says no, I've earned the right to tell the story of the time I did so well and then didn't, or the time that I messed up and was delivered. And functionally, that is the essence of these stories. That is why we play D&D. That is why you have put in hundreds of hours into some video games. That is why you see people that have played nothing but League of Legends for years of their lives. Because those stories are so gripping and so compelling, and the catharsis so therapeutic and such a release for them that they need that moment. That moment is why I'm a tabletop gamer. That moment is why I play competitive video games. It's why I attend tournament after tournament. That's why I one day hope to fly to England to play the Lord of the Rings World Championship, even though I really don't think I can win. But I'm going to try. Because isn't that a great story? I didn't think I could, but I did. If you like this, and we're going to wrap up now, and I think there's time for questions because I came in right around the 75-minute mark. Check out the podcast. I'm not going to read the description to you. I assume if you're here, you can read that for yourself. It's on Spotify, Google Podcasts, iTunes, Amazon, TuneIn. I really enjoy talking about games. This is one of my favorite things to do. Thank you all very much for attending. Do we have time for questions?
We absolutely do have time for questions, and there is a Q&A option at the bottom of Zoom for them to queue up the questions. There are a couple already here. We have a couple of applause hitting the chat, so thank you again so much, Steve. What I'm going to do is I am going to actually read through the questions that we've gotten so far, and I'm going to encourage folks to keep asking these questions. And I'm just going to kind of go in the order that they were presented. All right, Steve?
Yep.
All right, cool. So the first question, which came up towards the beginning when you were talking about the different types of randomness in games, doesn't the unexpectedness of the opponent's move make chess or any turn-based game random?
Yes, it does. But again, you're looking at then it's my fault or your fault that the game went away it did. You're not being delivered by fate. It's a different sort of a feel to it. And that's also where those games, much like tennis, not that if you've ever seen me in real life, I've ever played tennis, those games are legitimately about players of equal skill. And the enjoyment goes down substantially if you're outside of your skill bracket, because functionally the game becomes much easier and much harder based on that much more predictable randomization. This is the same thing as, I know this is a very mean comparison, so forgive me. D-rankers, matchmaking systems where they D-rank down a level or two from gold to bronze or from platinum to silver and then destroy their way back to victory. It's not really the same kind of a contest, right? Because it is a sort of cheat into and of itself.
Nice. All right. Next question actually is more of a personal query asking about your lamp full of dice. This being back towards where you're talking about the difference between the dice and the lamp.
Yes. So I do actually have a lamp full of dice, and I will threaten my dice at tournaments where if they keep rolling cold or they keep betraying me, they will end up in the lamp. It generally doesn't apply to D&D dice. The polyhedral sets are usually fairly immune because I'm not taking the moment particularly seriously. But I have straight up stood up in the middle of a tournament, furious at my D6s, thrown them into the garbage, washed my hands in the bathroom, and bought a fresh set to continue the tournament with. The dice were so egregious they don't even get to live in the lamp. They just, whatever happened to them is their problem, not mine. They're not my dice anymore. I do think, though, that for players, people that play with dice, especially, your dice become like your tool. They're your thing. They're a part of who you are as a gamer, and how they act and what they do genuinely matters to you as a player. And this is why I have no less than 40 polyhedral sets running around my house. I'm sure if you're any kind of long-term D&D player, you have the same thing. I play Shadowrun. I have 72 dice for Shadowrun that I cycle in and out. When I play a game like Armada or Star Wars Legion, where the dice are specially made by the company that makes them, Fantasy Flight Games, they're custom-made D8s. And I have 4 sets apiece, and I'll cycle them in and out of tournaments. None of them have made it to the lamp, but a couple are on the bubble, where it's like, they made really nice translucent dice for this game, but, they're terrible, and I just can't keep rolling these. These have to go away. I encourage you. The lamp came from Target. It's nothing particularly advanced. It's just
You also got a comment from Justin, who logged in around the time you were introducing Warhammer, and he just wanted to say, it looks like you don't love hive tyrants.
So Justin, for the entirety of the audience, however many people are here tonight, Justin's a very dear friend of mine. He and I played together for years. He is he's one of the 2 reasons the hive tyrants were in there. The other person, you know who you are if you're here. And no, I don't love your hive tyrants. I hate them. I will always take precautions against them. They're disgusting, and the fact that you have 6 of them is very annoying.
From another one of the attendees, how does the concept of fate affect the quality of results? In the historical example, it seems like fate was used to qualify a person for combat. Is there a parallel in games?
I do think there is. I think that your rank or things that you have won definitely act as a qualifier. And if you'll indulge me for just 1 second, I'm going to shuffle off screen ever so gently, still within range of my corded microphone, to reveal a humble brag. This is a fairly substantial. This is my iPhone 11. It's a fairly substantial trophy that I've won, playing the Game of Thrones Song of Ice and Fire miniatures game. And I think that when you start putting things like this on your bookshelf because your girlfriend is super understanding of your hobby and interests, that's the same kind of a thing. I also think that in that sort of fate and reputation thing, in that battle-tested environment, you start to develop a reputation for games that you're particularly at or good at or lucky in. And in that vein of luck, you'll see people go, oh, I have to deal with this guy. It's going to be a rough day at top table. And to that end, and this is not, I guess, technically a cheat, but it goes into that skill versus random feeling of life, that you can, in total honesty, tilt somebody by reputation alone. A really, really good friend of mine, he's an excellent wargamer by the name of Marcus. I tilted him once because whenever he and I would play, we would both take first player. And I wasn't feeling super confident about beating him at a tournament, and we're playing for the tournament. This is the last game. We're at the top table. We're both undefeated. One of us is walking home with the trophy, and one of us is coming away second place. And it's a long 1.5-hour ride home to be second. So I was like, I won the roll to decide who went first or second. And I said, oh, I'll go second. And he was like, wait, what? And I'm like, yeah, I'll go second. And he's like, okay. I'm like, yep, got you. Caught you napping. 2 for flinching. And that kind of thing does significantly matter. Let's see. I think, did I adequately address that?
I thought so. If anyone wants to expand on that, please use the Q&A section. I'll move on to the next question while we wait and see what is said. The next one comes from Kevin, and they also raised this question not just for you, but also your podcast co-host Amanda, who is in the attendees in the chat.
Oh, she made it. Hi, Amanda.
So if Amanda wants to type a response too, please feel free. How do you feel about fixed stories to forge narrative, such as narrative scenarios for 40K? Their stories is being, sorry, this is just reading off of what it has in the Q&A. Their story is being told, but the variables are being more controlled than pure competition. Shouldn't that eliminate the hand of fate?
So I'm going to answer the second part first. It actually forces the hand of fate. A lot of times those scenarios tend to be weighted, particularly old school 40K scenarios. X-Wing was another game by FFG where you dogfight in the Star Wars universe. The scenarios you get for that are narrative driven are almost entirely weighted in one side or the other's favor. And you're basically playing at I hope I don't die earlier than I'm supposed to sort of a scenario. And in that vein, I think that those things have their place. And I do enjoy them from time to time. I think there's a lot to be said in Armada for the 2 campaigns they've released, particularly Rebellion and the Rim, which is a wonderful little campaign. If you're new to the game, you play it with a lot fewer points. You need a lot less stuff. You can kind of really get in there and enjoy it earlier on. And they bring a lot of flavor. Are they the absolute contest of tactics and fate and skill that some of the other ones are? Not really, no. But I think that they're a very good example of what you can do in those aspects. I think there is a lot more to be said for coming into the game with that attitude, though, of I'm playing down or we're playing a contest that is less than an absolute even grudge match. And we're just kind of here to see what happens and how it goes. That also bleeds heavily into the historical wargaming section, which I'm not terribly well experienced with. But you'll see a lot of people doing things that like you consider very weird, that I considered very weird for a very long time, such as reenacting the Battle of Gettysburg on a tabletop. Like, what are you doing? Like, watch a movie, read a history book. Why are you doing that? And the answer is they're just curious, right? It's a narrative scenario. They know what happened in real life. They know what should happen mathematically and statistically, and they're just sort of playing and interacting with that idea. Is that for everyone? Definitely not, but it is something that I know a great deal of people are very interested in. Oh, we have another one.
Question? Yes. Or yeah,
we have another question.
This one's on the personal side from, and I'm sorry if I get your pronunciation of your name wrong, Nasifa. How's the new house and the bunnies?
I have 4 large rabbits for everybody in the audience who doesn't know. The largest of which is 12 pounds. The smallest of which is 6, all of which are very large for rabbits. They're wonderful. The new house is great. The rabbits are super happy because we've been home basically the whole time we've lived here, because we moved 2 months before quarantine started, or 3 months before quarantine started. So yeah, it's a good time.
They're doing good?
They're doing great. They're having a wonderful time.
That is all the questions from the Q&A. We still do have a little bit of time if folks want to ask any more questions there. I actually do have a question for you, Steve, while people type. So the whole time while you were doing this talk, I was thinking about a storytelling adage that came from either Matt Parker or Trey Stone, one of the South Park guys. And it's one that I really enjoy, which is that a good story structure is not this happens and then this happens and then this happens. It's this happens, therefore this happens, but then this happens. With that but then being like, everything seems to be going okay, but then like a gear gets thrown into the works. But everything connects to each other in kind of a whole and organic way, rather than this happens and then this happens and then this happens. And I was wondering, like, if you could speak at all to if there is a way we as game designers can use randomness or controlled randomness to kind of like try and create this structure as best as we can in a game setting.
Yes, absolutely. That's absolutely a thing that can happen. And I'm going to indulge myself, and I apologize. I'm going to tell an Armada story that doesn't paint me in a particularly favorable light. I hope everyone here will forgive me for it. I was playing a tournament, and this guy played a really just unfun thing. It was basically agreed upon by the community that you weren't going to act like this, and this player did. And it was early on in the tournament, and it didn't really, it knocked us both out of the tournament. It was a terrible 2 hours of my life. And basically this person refused to engage in combat in a military game, right? So he removed the randomness, right? We came to play a war game, but he refused to fire a shot. Therefore, we floated around for 2 hours and then called it a day. Fun story. See, here's the thing. I have a pretty good memory for faces and not for names. So I don't actually know what this person is called, but I know what he looks like. Half a year later, we're at a regional championship. And I'm middle of the pack. And I might make up words, but I'm not going to win this tournament. And, at a certain point, you have to weigh your options in life. And fate deals me this guy in the matchup. And I'm looking at him. And now I'm playing what's called 1-1, and he's 2-0, which means he has 2 wins, no losses. I have 1 loss. My record with the tie breaks has put me at the very top of the 1 win, 1 loss, and his record has put him at the very bottom of the 2 wins. It's a 4-game tournament, so if he wins this, he'll be playing probably top table. Unless I decide to pull the same stunt on him that he pulled on me 6 months ago. So here he is controlling his fate, except there's this guy that remembers who he is. So instead of playing and fighting like he needs me to do desperately, I let my ships float gently in the corner in a serene, beautiful ballet pattern where I fly them in little integrating weaves, seriously, like braiding them back and forth, literally showing off how fast I can move my ships without engaging him. And then he looks at me and he says, because my reputation is fairly bloodthirsty in Armada, aren't we going to fight? And I said, oh no, I'm 1-1. I don't have a shot at winning this, but I know you're 2-0. This is my revenge for Steele. None of us are going to the top table. You can concede now, or we can float here for an hour and call it a day and go to lunch, because our lunch break was after that. And I watched the color drain from his face and him sit down, and I said, our community has rules, and you're being punished for breaking them right now. Not all fate is in the hands of our dice. So I absolutely agree. And I know that storytelling rule. That storytelling rule is live and die. If you write a story where it's just and, no one wants to hear that. No one wants to hear ands.
Yep.
Butts in there for all day.
All right, very cool. And we have one more question up on deck from Josh. When does random affecting game derail a game, and when does it improve it a bunch?
Oh, okay. So this has largely to do with player attitude. Fundamentally, if you are coming in with a very serious demeanor and the game is hyper random, the randomness will ruin the game, because you will fight fate the whole way in, because no matter what you do, the randomness will be more than you can actually compensate or mitigate or otherwise deal with. Fundamentally, on the other side of that coin, if you're coming in with the attitude of, hey, this game is really, really random, and I'm just coming here to do the best I can, right? I'm playing a straight no chaser versus a mitigated game in terms of randomness from the very, very early sides of the presentation. That actually can be a ton of fun, because really every roll is that craps style all or nothing. Are we going to get rich, or are we going to lose a bunch of money? I don't know. Let's see what happens. It's actually very easy if you're in a store or a public setting and people are playing games to actually see that happen. Conventions like Gen Con or Nova or PAX Unplugged, although none of those happened this year, are really, really good examples of that, because the people that are playing for fun and can accept that games have a lot of randomness in them are the ones that are hooting and hollering and having a really good time, and they look like they're blessed, and they're like, hey, listen, I played you, but yeah, you were cool. You want to go to dinner and talk and have a good time and relax? Versus the people that are just stony silence, like, that roll is above average. That's 2 above average rolls in a row. Can I see your dice? Can I weigh your dice? Can I see your dice? It's an important player attitude thing, and it's an important thing to know about yourself as well. If you're a very serious player, stick to the games that allow you to be serious. If you're a very fun, relaxed player, stick to the games that are fun and relaxed. Otherwise, you'll be very, very frustrated. There's a reason, despite its popularity and longevity, games like chess and Go have their fans and they don't, right? And it goes into that phenomenon of, how do I respond to this as a player? And to that end, that actually goes back to, I think, Kevin's question about narratives in these games, where it's like, if you can come in with the right attitude, any game and any amount of randomness can be acceptable. You're literally deciding how much of fate you can cope with in these contests.
Okay. Well, there doesn't seem to be any questions left. I think that's going to... Oh, wait, actually, one just came in. And I will go ahead with that. 1 second. Yes, so from AJ. Something I found interesting as a writer, a D&D player, and a DM is how the characters I create for a book, the characters I create to play, and the NPCs I create for a world are all fundamentally different. I find that when writing a book, I write with a theme in mind, but when writing for something random like D&D, I write with opportunity in mind. I'm curious you, or anyone else here, has also experienced this and what your thoughts are. It's a good question. I like that one.
That is a great question. It's very involved. I think that that's absolutely fair, and I think that in that I kind of think I work largely the same way. I'm in the final straits of the Curse of Strahd for D&D players that know the Curse of Strahd. If you don't, it's a very brutal, legendary campaign that's been reprinted on and off since the 1970s. And in the book, Strahd has 3 wives, and they don't really play a role in the story. But I did a bunch of research, and a bunch of other people thought that felt weird, right? Like, the Bride of Dracula usually has a major part to play, like they're a boss. So as I delved online, a lot of other people felt that way, and I got to read stories about how people took that opportunity to create really powerful but variant versions of Strahd himself as a reflection of himself and each of his wives. and how those individual reflections actually very much spiced up the campaign, to the point where my players have killed 2 of the 3 wives, and if you're familiar with the campaign Rahadin, which is essentially the vampire's lieutenant, like Dracula's, I forget his name, Renfield, functionally, they're more interested in killing the last bride of Strahd than Strahd himself. Because the last bride of Strahd has tormented that party so egregiously, she's burned down every place they've ever lived. She has been their arch nemesis, while Strahd has basically sat back and laughed at them. And it is very, very telling when you take those opportunities, how successful they are based upon the player reaction. And I think as a DM, that is very, very much where your creativity and prowess as a DM can be determined is, yeah, I put this in and players really, really loved it. Or I put this in and players really didn't care about it. Or I tried it and I want to try it again under a different guise because I got it a little bit wrong. And I think those opportunities make you a better thematic writer long term, because when you see how people react to it, the randomness of it, the spontaneity of it, maybe you're improvising your way through some of those encounters because the rules didn't actually work the way you wanted them to, or you forgot a rule or a spell list or something interesting like that. It really puts you in good stead when you're writing a piece of narrative fiction and you're like, oh, thematically, I think I should try this. And you reflect on those opportunity experiences and dig into more interesting ideas than you would otherwise.
All right, very cool. All right, well, thank you again so much, Steve, for doing this. I'm going to put my video back on for you. One more announcement today. Thank you again so much for this. This was a really great, a really fun talk. Really appreciate having you here.
Thank you for having me. It was a great time.
Thank you. Before everyone heads out, I do have one more announcement, which I alluded to earlier. Some of you may have seen this on the Twitter and on Facebook and such, but just so you know, we do have one more event this month. Is actually happening next week on a Wednesday during the Drexel Welcome Week. It's actually in conjunction with Drexel for their Welcome Week. Dan Fernacey will be on Zoom with us. There is a pre-reg link. I think Rob posted it earlier in the chat, so you can pre-reg for that talk just like you could pre-reg for this one. Dan Fernacey is the creator of Rivals of Aether. He's former Drexel alum, former Microsoft alum, working on games such as Killer Instinct. He's going to be talking about his industry experience. Again, that is Wednesday, September 16th, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. That's really going to be really cool. Keep an ear out. Soon we're going to have more information about the October meeting as well as our other meetings. And I think that's going to be it. So thanks again, everyone. This was a really great night. One more thank you to Steve. Yeah. And keep an eye out, too. We're going to have this talk up on our YouTube page at some point in the very near future as well.